From verse 31 to 35, you have the papacy. Okay, 31 through 35, that's where the papacy is found. Before that, we have Rome, and before that, we have the northern and southern kingdoms of Alexander's empire. So this right here is papacy. This is more modern times. Now France comes onto the scene, Napoleon, and he's in these verses right here, 36 through 40. But verse 40 has several different players, Napoleon, Egypt, and the Ottoman Turk. And the Turk takes over from 40 through 45. Okay, so you can break it down in these sections. This 40 through 45, that's Turk. 36 through 39, that's France. 31 through 35, that's papacy. So that's something that may help to keep things straight in your mind. It helps me to think about it in that way. Now, what do we know about the papacy? How long, pop quiz, how long did the papacy reign for? 1260 years, right? 1260 years, a times and a dividing of times. 1260 days. We see that in the prophecy. I'm going to go to Revelation 11, where you see these 1260 days. And I will give power unto my two witnesses, and they shall prophesy 1,260 days, clothed in sackcloth. Okay, that's one place you find it. Revelation 12 as well. And the woman fled into the wilderness. What's the woman? It's a church. Jeremiah 6:2. And I've likened the daughter of Zion, that's God's people, to a comely and delicate woman. She's like a woman. Great. So Revelation 12:6. And the woman, this is God's woman, fled into the wilderness, where she hath a place prepared of God, that they should feed her 1,260 days. Okay, 1,260 days. 1260. Got it? Okay. Keep that in mind. But that's how long the church is going to be in the wilderness. Why is the church in the wilderness? Daniel 11:31 through 35 talks about these scenes. An arm shall stand on his part. This is Rome's part. Arm shall stand on his part, or the Roman church's part. Arms would, you think like bear arms, right? These are men with weapons going to stand on his part on behalf of the Roman bishops, and they shall pollute the sanctuary of strength. This is actually not speaking of their own sanctuary. This is actually speaking of, because they do that in a sense to God's sanctuary, if you will, or to God's church, but they're actually destroying the pagan sanctuaries first. That's what the Roman church used to do. They used to go and break, they used to ransack the pagans, destroy their temples and things like that. Sometimes steal their artifacts and make them, Christianize them or baptize them in a way. So they're actually destroying the religion before them. They shall pollute the sanctuary, the religion of strength, the one before them. They're going to need arms to do this, and shall take away the daily abomination, or the pagan abomination. Sacrifice is a supplied word. Translators got this one wrong. They usually get everything right, but every once in a while, there's something wrong. So don't doubt the King James Bible, but this is just one of those instances. They thought that this was dealing with the daily sacrifice of the Jews, perhaps. So they put that in there. But we can see that this verse has nothing to do with the Jews. So it's just a translator mistake. And they shall take away the daily or continual abomination, and they shall place the abomination that make it desolate. You're going to take away the first abomination, then they're going to set up their own abomination. That's how we understand that. And this verse, if you study it deeply, you will come away. If we did a whole study on the daily, you would come away with that impression too. And just keep in mind that this is not some truth that's just laying on the surface. You have to actually compare all the scriptures together to come away with that understanding. But that's actually what's being spoken about. Okay, verse 32, we're dealing with Rome. And such as do wickedly against the covenant shall the papacy corrupt. So people are doing things wickedly against God's people, against God's religion, because this is still Rome, the Roman bishops, they corrupt by flatteries, by inducements, with money, right? That's how the Catholic Church does it, through politics and things. But the people that do know their God shall be strong and do exploits. So some people are still going to go out in the Spirit of God and do great things on behalf of the Lord, even during this hard time. And they that understand among the people shall instruct many, yet they shall fall by the sword, and by flame, and by captivity, and by spoil many days. How many days? 1,260 days. In the other parts of the scripture, they tell us how many days it is. Okay, so it's for 1,260 years. Now, when they shall fall, they shall be holpen with a little help. The reformers came along and converted some of the countries in Europe to the Reformation, like Switzerland went that way. Not all of them did, but there was pockets in Europe where they could go. There was America. Remember, the earth helped the woman in Revelation chapter 12. And they were escaping the Anglican Church because of its similarities to popery. And so the English left, and they came and they sailed. And they came to America. They were helped. There was a little bit of help. There was a little bit of an escape. But many shall cleave to them with flattery. So many people still stuck with the Catholics. Okay, verse 35, and some of them of understanding shall fall, to try them, to purge, and to make them white, righteous white, even to the time of the end, because it is yet for a time appointed. Well, if you know how many days this is going to be going on, then you know when the time of the end is. And if you know when the time of the end is, what else do you know? What else do you know? Daniel chapter 12, verse 4. But thou, O Daniel, shut up the words and seal the book, even to the time of the end. You know when the little book is unsealed. This is all very important. This is how we substantiate our doctrine. Because it is yet for an appointed time. It is for an appointed time. God has prophetic periods stretching down to this time. Okay, so what happens in 1798? Well, the beast suffers a deadly wound. So we should expect a new power to come up at this time. Does a new power come up around this time? And the king shall do according to his will. Now, some people, they get into the ancient languages, say, the article the works well, but the article a here works really well too. And a king shall do according to his will. Uriah Smith argues that way. But whatever it is, it works just fine, the reading that we have in the Authorized Bible. And the king shall do according to his will. Now, you'll notice if we come back earlier in the chapter, and a mighty king shall stand up, that shall rule with great dominion and do according to his will. Oh, now we have a new power here. That's Greece. That's Alexander. Then the verse before, there's 3 kings, and the 4th, Xerxes, is far richer than they all. And by his strength, through his riches, he shall stir up all against the realm of Greece. That did happen. And then after that, sometime after that, a king stands up. This is Alexander. We know that if we study verse 4 in depth, that it's most definitely Alexander. Well, here we have a king doing according to his will. We have a new king ruling at this time. And who likens himself like Alexander the Great, Napoleon. And this is who this power is speaking of, is the French. And a king shall do according to his will, and he shall exalt himself and magnify himself above every god, and shall speak marvelous things against the God of gods, and shall prosper till the indignation be accomplished. For that is determined shall be done. Okay, I want to come over here and read you some of the blasphemous things that the French were saying during the French Revolution. God, if you exist, avenge your injured name. I bid you defiance. You remain silent. You dare not launch your thunders. Who, after this, will believe in your existence? The whole ecclesiastical establishment was destroyed. That's from Scott's Napoleon. A writer in Blackwood's magazine, this is November 1870, said, France is the only nation in the world concerning which the authentic record survives, that as a nation she lifted her hand in open rebellion against the author of the universe. Plenty of blasphemers, plenty of infidels there have been, and still continue to be, in England, Germany, Spain, and elsewhere. But France stands apart in the world's history as the single state which, by the decree of her legislative assembly, pronounced that there was no God, and of which the entire population of the capital and a vast majority of elsewhere, women as well as men, danced and sang with joy in accepting the announcement. They're like, hooray, there's no God. But then they descended into a drunken debauchery for many years, and the country virtually collapsed. The king here introduced cannot denote the same power which was last noticed, namely the papal power, for the specifications will not hold good if applied to that power. Take a declaration in the next verse, nor regard any God. That has never been true of the papacy. God and Christ, though often placed in a false position, have never been professedly set aside and rejected from that system of religion. This logic is sound. It says they don't regard any, that means all gods, the true gods, the false gods. They don't regard any God. I think I might have said true gods. That just slipped out, but I meant the true God if I did say that. Okay, so we're reading that next verse now. Let's look at it. Neither shall he regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. He doesn't regard the God of his fathers, which for the French was who? Well, they were at least nominally professing to believe in the one true God, but they're Trinitarians. But some of them, I think their hearts were in the right place. Nor the desire of women. What does that mean? Okay, let's look to see what was going on during the time of the French Revolution. Intimately connected with these laws affecting religion was that which reduced the union of marriage, the most sacred engagements which human beings can form, and the most permanence of which leads most strongly to the consolidation of society, to the state of a mere civil contract of a transitory character, which any two persons might engage in and cast loose at pleasure, when their taste was changed or their appetite gratified. If fiends had set themselves at work to discover a mode most effectual, destroying whatever is venerable, graceful, or permanent in domestic life, and obtaining at the same time an assurance that the mischief which it was their object to create should be perpetrated from one generation to another, perpetuated from one generation to another, they could not have invented a more effectual plan than the degradation of marriage into a state of mere occasional cohabitation or licensed concubinage. Sophie Arnault, an actress famous for her witty things, she said, described the Republican marriage as the sacrament of adultery. Now look, in our days, we got something going on very similar, and we see where it leads. Some people can't even differentiate between a man and a woman anymore. How do I know that this is still speaking of France in verse 40? Well, let's look at this. Neither shall he, we know who this is, regard the God of his fathers, nor the desire of women, nor regard any God, for he shall magnify himself above all. This is blasphemous France, right? But in his estate, still speaking of France, shall he honor the God of forces. And a God whom his fathers knew not shall he honor with gold and silver and with precious stones and pleasant things. This is very interesting because after a few years of them being just purely atheistic, the powers that be, the ruler said, this doesn't work. People become ungovernable. And so they created a God. They created Lady Reason, the goddess of reason. And they paraded her through the streets. This was that strange God, the secular God. They started to worship reason. Thus shall he do, still speaking of he, still speaking of him, France. Thus shall France do in the most strongholds with a strange God, whom he shall acknowledge and increase with glory. And he shall cause them to rule over many, and shall divide the land for gain. They're going to divide the land for gain. Did the French ever do that? They absolutely did. The authorities took control of land, private citizens' lands, those that were wealthy in the country, and they divided up their land and they paid their debts and things of that sort. Kind of like what the progressive liberals want to do. They want to tax people that are rich, and they want to take their wealth, and they want to do a Robin Hood type thing. Well, that's what's going on here. They're going to take people's land and divide it for gain. And at that time, at the time of the end, that's 1798, shall the king of the south push at him. Don't even look at anything else until you've established who this him is. Don't continue reading. Who is this him? It's the same power. King of the south, Egypt, is going to push at him. It's in 1798. Did Egypt push at Napoleon in 1798? Yes, he did. That's where the Battle of the Pyramids, the famous, just when the prophecy said it would happen, it happened. And the king of the north, the Ottoman Empire, shall come against him like a whirlwind. Is that true too? Yes, at this time, the Ottomans got involved, and they came with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships. And he, who's it speaking of? He is speaking of the Ottoman Empire, right? And the king of the north shall come against Napoleon like a whirlwind with chariots and with horsemen and with many ships. And he shall, still speaking of the king of the north, shall enter into the countries and overflow and pass over. He shall enter into the glorious land, still speaking of the Turk. And many countries shall be overthrown, but these shall escape out of his hand, even Edom, Moab, and the chief children of Ammon. The people from Jordan. They live on the west side of Galilee, and those on the west of the Sea of Galilee escaped. The Turk was chasing them through Syria, then through the glorious land. These countries escaped. Those from Jordan escaped. He shall stretch forth his hand also upon the countries, and the land of Egypt shall not escape. The Turk goes all the way to Egypt. This establishes his authority there. This also happened, and he shall have power over the treasures of gold and silver and over all the precious things of Egypt, and the Libyans and Ethiopians shall be at his step. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. So these things were happening 1798, 1799. That's when these events were happening. 1800. Okay. Now something else is going to happen. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. Well, who's north of Turkey? You should know Turkey's on the south side of the Black Sea. That's where Constantinople is, or Istanbul. Who's north of that? North of that is Crimea. The north side of the Black Sea is Crimea. And who's there? The Russians and the Ukrainians. So, and it was all Russia at that time. But tidings out of the east and out of the north shall trouble him. The Russians are going to trouble him. Oh, they troubled him so often in the 19th century after this war with Napoleon. Therefore, he shall go forth with great fury to destroy. This happened in the Crimean War. He went forward with great fury and utterly to take away many. Some consider this the first modern war. So they're using all sorts of destructive, deadly weaponry. And he shall plant the tabernacles of his palace between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Yet he shall come to his end and none shall help him. So you can see that there hasn't been a whole bucket list of things that needed to happen, even going back to pioneer days, before what? Michael shall stand up. And at that time shall Michael stand up. Close of human probation. So even in pioneer day, when Uriah Smith is preaching on the Eastern question, they were already looking forward to the fulfillment of verse 45. And the Turk shall go to Jerusalem. He shall plant the tabernacles. Tabernacle is what? Tabernacle is something temporary, usually, like a tent you set up for just a little while, or it's something that's movable. Maybe the reason tabernacles is being used is for both of those senses, maybe something even more. But he's going to plant his tent, his tabernacle of his what? Of his palace, of his government. He's going to move his government between the seas and the glorious holy mountain. Are there seas that surround Jerusalem? Mount Zion, Mount Moriah, Mount Olives, the glorious holy mountain. I believe speaking of Mount Zion in Jerusalem. Yes, the Dead Sea, the Red Sea, the Mediterranean Sea. Yet he shall come to his end. People have been helping him. They don't want Turkey to come to his end. They don't want Russia to be able to get their ships out of the Black Sea. Nobody in Europe wants that, because Europe will come to its end. The rock is going to smash the image. That is Christ, but it just, he comes after the river Euphrates dries up, after he comes to his end, and none shall help him. Why doesn't anybody help him? He did the unforgivable. He planted the tabernacles of his palace in the glorious holy mountain. He took back Jerusalem. Help is out of the question now.